let's get into the third session of this seminar. I think you're going to find this one useful because day 3 is about the negative thought traps that we fall into that rob us of joy. And so I tried to think of a catchy title, and I failed. So, but no, as a nod to the 7 deadly sins, I'm calling this the 7 mental sins, right? These are the negative thoughts that distort reality, because they're called cognitive distortions, and steal our mental peace. So, let me explain to you what this means before we get started. There are negative thought patterns that can be negative towards yourself. Some people have poor body image issues. Some people have poor self-esteem. Some people just can't accept compliments and good things about themselves, and it affects their self-esteem. Some people don't think that they're valuable or worthy to experience love. Some people have intimacy problems and they push people away. Some people have the opposite of that, and they have narcissism and they can't recognize when they're wrong, right? But all of these things are 2 things. They're negative emotions, right? Negative thoughts, I should say. And they're an emotional center in the brain. Sometimes when you're dealing with a difficult time in your life, like trauma, like say for instance a breakup, or you lose a pet, right? Something that's very emotionally upsetting. It's very logical what you're feeling. It's logical in the sense that it's perfectly normal for you to be feeling that way. But it's not rational, right? So if you live in a place that's irrational all the time, it's really going to sap you of your joy. And that's what we're going to talk about. So this comes from therapy language, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy. If you've ever done any cognitive behavioral therapy, it's all about helping you identify problems in your life so that you can recognize them when they happen. So I would advise you to probably be ready to write some of this stuff down. I'm going to use some terminology that I didn't invent. This is language that's used in therapy sessions. This is not a therapy session, let me say that, obviously. But what I'm trying to teach you is the language, the verbiage of the mental thought problems that you probably don't recognize when they happen. You probably are not going to have all 7 of these. You may not even have 4 or 5 of these, but chances are you suffer from 1 or 2 or more at some different point in your life. 2 or 3 of these really convict me, and I'm going to share them with you when I get there, because they're things that I deal with. Because here's the idea. We want to recognize our irrational thoughts, recognize them for what they are. They're negative emotions, and we want to navigate those so that we can be realistic, right? So let's start with the same thesis, the same theme for the whole week. And that's this idea of the 3 paths, right? Being intentional about things in our life that matter. Well, your mental well-being is an important aspect of your life. So just like your relationships, we'll talk about tomorrow, just like your finances, just like your habits, just like your hang-ups, your addictions, whatever, this is a part of your life that you want to get right. And even more simply than that, this is a part of your life where you can avoid some unnecessary suffering, right? That's the whole idea here. So your thought patterns could be robbing you of happiness. We want to be intentional, we want to be purposeful. We don't want to be complacent about this. We want to recognize these cognitive distortions when they come up so we can label them and we can say, no, I'm not being rational, I'm being too emotional. Here's the name for it. We're going to say what it is, right? So I picked 7 of these in no particular order. Let's start with the first one. The first of the 7 mental sins is called blaming. Now, what's interesting about this one, I started with this one because this one's a little bit the most convicting. It's kind of harsh, so it's a good one to start with. We can get it out of the way, right? The interesting thing about blaming, it's not self-blame. It's quite the opposite. This is a form of narcissism that some people suffer from, right? Blaming is the psychological explanation for people who fail to accept their responsibility for something that has gone wrong. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always your fault. It doesn't even mean that a whole situation is your fault. What it means is that every time something goes poorly in your life, you still have, bless you, you still have a responsibility. You still have the ability to make a choice, right? You still have the ability to determine what you're going to do next. And if you fall into this trap, this blaming trap, where you're never able to be accountable to anyone, you can't move forward and you can't grow, right? Think about it this way. The person that I'm going to use the language from is a guy named Brian Buffini. He's I mentioned him yesterday with the circles, the aspects of your life that you evaluate. He's a business consultant or a business coach. And he uses this term of stories. We tell ourselves stories, which are really just a code word for excuses, right? Now, it sounds kind of harsh. It sounds kind of like triggering and blaming to say, okay, something went wrong. You take responsibility for it. You don't make excuses. But here's the point. We all want to exist in some kind of organization where the people who have responsibility, like say the bosses, the managers, the teachers, the coaches, whatever, your parents, those people need to be willing to accept responsibility. That's what we want, right? Let me say it a different way. You guys are smart people. You can appreciate when someone like a teacher, a coach, a mentor, someone in an authoritative position is willing to accept responsibility when they make a mistake, right? Is that fair? That's fair to say. So if someone's in a position where they have responsibility, which means they have things that they are responsible for, and those people are constantly screwing up and constantly making mistakes, they have to be willing to accept that, right? So let me lay it out for you like this. This is an easy trap to fall into at this stage of your life, because you've been conditioned to believe that there's always an explanation for you missing the mark, right? That's what it is. It's not a personal attack on your character, but let's say, for instance, you come to school and it takes you longer to park than you thought. You roll into first period 2 minutes late. You walk in the door, not even 2 minutes. Let's say you're 30 seconds late. And in your mind, you're thinking, that's close enough. Lots of people are way more late than me. There's plenty of reasons why I would have been this late, and you make an excuse. But the reality is this, it's not a personal attack on you. There's a standard. There's something measurable. It's like being cut from a team, right? Here's the number. You're just below it, right? You can't change the number. We can't change the standard. We can't explain away why you failed to accomplish something. It doesn't mean it's an indictment on your character or you're a bad person, but you have to be willing to accept the responsibility that sometimes you miss the mark. There's things you can't account for. There's things that you can't know about, but you have to plan for those things, right? What is Murphy's Law? You guys know Murphy's Law? Does anybody know Murphy's Law? What can go wrong will go wrong. So if you watch these like shows on HGTV, does anybody watch those where they like renovate houses and stuff like that, right? They always budget X amount of dollars to renovate a house. And the problem is then they get into the walls and they find out the pipes are old or like the wires are old, and there's always these expenses that they never planned for, right? So you have to budget for unexpected expenses when you renovate a house. But you need to do that in every aspect of your life. Like if you're driving to school on Highway 98, it's not that unreasonable to think that there's going to be traffic. So budgeting extra time in case there's traffic is being responsible. And here's the thing, even if you're not there on time, they're not going to like chastise you personally. You just have to accept the responsibility. You were late to class. The consequence for missing the mark is that you get marked a tardy. You don't throw a fit. You don't complain. No one's calling you out or saying you're a bad person, and you say things like, oh, it's not fair. No, this is a cognitive trap of not accepting responsibility, right? It's clearly defined. It's like the speed limit, right? The speed limit is 70 and you're going 74. And you're like, well, to me, that's not that fast over the speed limit. But the key word there is over. It's definable. It's not open for interpretation. It's not gray. The speed limit is 70. If you're going 70 and a half, you're going over the speed limit, right? Your curfew, if your curfew is midnight, you get there at 12:02, it's like, well, that's close enough. Well, no, it's not. Your curfew isn't 12:02, and you're like, oh, well, like semantics. But that's the point, y'all. The point is that take responsibility when you miss the mark. It's okay that you did, but take responsibility for it. It's a sign of maturity. Right? You want people to take responsibility when they wrong you. Because here's the problem. This is what it boils down to. We judge ourselves by our intentions. But that's not how other people judge us. Other people judge us by our actions. And we do the same thing for others. So for instance, let's say you're like in a friendship, or tomorrow we'll talk about romantic relationships. Let's say you get in a fight with your significant other and they hurt your feelings. And you're going to say, their thought is, well, they didn't mean to hurt your feelings, so you should forgive them. But you're not concerned about their intentions. You're just concerned about what they did. But you see how that's an unfair comparison. If you want people to evaluate what you meant to do instead of what you actually do, well, where does that stop? It doesn't matter that you meant to hurt somebody's feelings. It matters that you did hurt somebody's feelings, and you just have to make it right. It's okay. You just have to accept responsibility for it, and you have to make it right. Right? We want to be in organizations where people accept responsibility for their mistakes and they make it right. But we don't. We hold ourselves to a different standard, right? And here's the harsh reality of most of the working world. If you work in any kind of field that has metrics, right, where they measure you based on something that's quantifiable, like your sales goals or your batting average or whatever it is, that's clearly defined. There's no excuse. You can say, oh, well, I got cut from this baseball team because I was hitting, 220, and everybody else on the team is hitting 30 points higher than me, right? You don't have to know anything about baseball to know that that's clearly, easily definable. There's their numbers and there's yours. It's cut and dry. It's black and white. Accept responsibility for what you can control in that situation. If you don't want to miss the mark, then do something different. But that's a mental trap. It's a type of narcissism, a failure to accept responsibility. It's not cute, right? If you've ever dated anybody that could ever be responsible for anything that they did, they never took responsibility, you don't have a lot of patience for that. Blaming everybody else but themselves. That's a sign of immaturity, right? What you do matters. The reasons why you don't accomplish them don't matter. You want to give excuses. But. It doesn't matter. Why? It matters that. And you didn't make it. And it's okay, right? The world is not going to end, but you have to accept responsibility for that, and you have to move on. But I know it's hard, right? Think about this, right? Think about this. Why do you think it's so difficult for people to admit that they are wrong? Why do we have such a problem with that?
It kind of breaks their perfect image of themselves, kind of.
Yes, it violates our image of ourselves. Being wrong is it's a flaw. But think about the vulnerability of it. Why are we so worried about people thinking that we're wrong?
Because we build our characters off of what other people think.
That's good. Because it matters to us what people think. We build our self-perception on what people think. And the reason why is that they might look at less of us, just like he said, right? Because we place a lot of stock in how people view us. But here's the problem. Because we think, if I can unpack both of those statements, we're worried people are going to judge us. Which means if I admit that I'm wrong, they're going to pile on. They're going to take advantage. They're going to attack. They're not going to accept that graciously and support me and try to help me get better, right? Don't we want to exist in an organization where if I make a mistake, people will support me and not people will attack me and judge me and make it worse? We don't want to admit that we're wrong because then everybody else is going to say, I told you so, right? So we've got to get past that point in our interactions with people, right? Failing forward. We got to get to a place where we realize that a mistake is still growth. It's still learning. It's still knowledge. Right? When people do their research projects in here, you're going to have to study a hypothesis. And sometimes your hypothesis is wrong. And people always get bent out of shape and they come to me and they're like, listen, coach, it didn't work. And I tell them, you're not going to fail a project because your hypothesis was wrong, because here's what we know about science. That's the point. Sometimes your hypotheses are incorrect, but it's still findings. We now know for sure. It's not a failure. It's just incorrect. You theorized, you did the research, it was well set up and well thought out. You accounted for all the variables and you were wrong. We learned something, y'all. We learned something. Accept responsibility when things don't go our way. Accept responsibility when it's our fault. And that will go a long way to building trust with people, right? That's the first mental sin, is blaming. Now that's more like you in relation to other people. The rest of these are kind of more about you internally and yourself, right? So let's get into the second one. The second mental sin is referred to as filtering. Filtering is a metaphor. It's not like a phone filter, but it's kind of like that. It's this idea that some people really struggle with this, and you might know some people like this. Some people have a hard time accepting compliments. You know what I mean? Like some people just have a hard time believing the positive press about themselves. Sometimes people will hang on to one little negative thing that happens, and they find it easy to ignore or filter out all of the positive evidence to the contrary. That's why it's called filtering. The mental filter distortion focuses on a single negative and excludes all the positive.
Can filtering work in like the opposite way, where you only focus on like positive and don't?
Yes, that would also be a cognitive distortion. What if you only focus on positive things and then you completely reject all the negative? That's like being in denial, right? And we'll see that in romantic relationships, because at the beginning of a relationship, sometimes you just don't want those red flags to be true. So you just really, really, really ignore a lot of problematic things because you just don't want to believe that is true. So yes, we can filter in the other direction too, and that's a problem, right? Because here's why. Let's go back to the beginning what I said. The point here is we want to be rational. This is coming from a place of emotional wounding. If you have a negative self-image or a negative body image, or if you have a negative talk about yourself, you may not believe people when they give you compliments. But that's not logical. That's a place of your own emotional, problems, your own emotional damage. That's something that you have to work on. And all we're trying to do is we're trying to identify these thought processes. We're trying to identify these distortions, these mental sins. So if this is you recognize when you're filtering. Somebody says, listen, you really did a good job. And you say, no, they're just saying that. They're just being nice because they're my teacher. Catch that thought. No. Someone's giving you a compliment based on something you earned. The evidence says you did a good job. Take the compliment. Learn to appreciate good things about yourself, right? Learn to appreciate good things about situations. Learn to be positive and optimistic in relationships with your friends, your peers, your parents, significant others, right? Because look at how it works. Let me give you an example of filtering. An example of this distortion is one partner in a romantic relationship dwelling on a single negative comment made by the other partner and viewing the relationship as hopelessly lost while ignoring the years of positive comments and experiences. The mental filter can foster a negative view of everything around you by only focusing on the negatives. That's something that a lot of us do. It's called filtering. So we had blaming, mental sin number 1. We have filtering, which is mental sin number 2. Let's get mental sin number 3. Now this one is particularly exhausting. It's called catastrophizing, or making something out of nothing, making a mountain out of a molehill. Sometimes people say, blowing things out of what? Proportion. Catastrophizing is a psychological therapy word for blowing things out of proportion. Sometimes people cling to the worst possible outcome and won't let it go. We see this every time a hurricane comes remotely close to the Florida Peninsula. Every hurricane season, it's like there's a disturbance, letter A14C is coming off the coasts of Africa. And everybody buys up all the toilet paper in Gulf Breeze, Florida. Yo. It's like, here's the thing. We don't want to be in denial, but we don't know that that's going to hit us yet. That's catastrophizing. When you make the assumption that the worst possible outcome is going to happen, that's not logical. That's emotionally irrational. Be rational, be logical. Students do this also, right? So here's an example I put in there. If you get a subpar grade in your course, like you get an 89 in your psychology class, you catastrophize. You say, no, I'm never going to get into Florida. I'm never going to go to med school. It's going to be your fault, coach. My parents are going to reject me. No. What are you basing that on? You have no evidence to suggest that your life is going to turn out awful now that you got a B in psychology. You have no evidence for that, right? You're not basing that on evidence. You're basing it on your own emotional hang-up, right? It's catastrophizing, assuming the worst. People assume the worst sometimes because they're bored. Everybody assumes that society's way worse than it is, right? The murder rate is super low. People don't die of natural causes. In fact, I read an interesting statistic that said, and bless you, in the last 50 years, y'all, 50 years, the rate of humans dying from natural disasters has dropped 99%. 99%. So like what happened in Kentucky with the tornadoes is horrifically sad because that just doesn't happen anymore. We have technology to help us combat natural disasters. People just don't die of stuff like they used to. And it's like, here's what I mean by that. We assume things are way worse than they are. Not based on anything that's evidential. Right? We assume that the ozone layer is going to evaporate in the next 24 hours and we're all going to be sucked into space and die if we don't throw straws away for the next. No, it's good to do those things. It's good to be aware. We don't want to be in denial about a real problem, but there's no helping catastrophizing something. That's a mental distortion. Jumping to the worst possible conclusion and staying there and driving yourself crazy with worry. The world's never going to be the same, man. Things are never going to get better. That's the next one. It'll never be the same. They're going to come here. They're going to take our jobs. That's catastrophizing. I had someone tell me that people who get the COVID vaccine will all be dead within the next 3 years. Yo. How do you respond to that? How are you like sitting at an event and someone gives you that, just a little trope and you're like, I don't even want to, I'm not going to engage you in a discussion. Like, we're not going to have that conversation. Huh? Right? Like, here's the thing. If that were the case, I'm not saying it's out of the realm of possibility that something bad can happen. I'm not in denial, but there's no evidence to suggest that. That's just a fear that people have. And that's what the news does. It plays on your fear. You're afraid of immigrants, so we're going to make you be afraid of immigrants. You're afraid of COVID, so we're going to make you be afraid of going outside. You will kill everyone's grandmother if you go to the post office. You're an evil human being. What? That's what's happening, y'all. That's the country that you live in now. It's just nothing but catastrophizing, competing news stories, right? Get vaccinated or you'll die. Don't get vaccinated because you will die. Just give me like a third of one. What do? I don't know what to do. It's catastrophizing, y'all. Now, again, I'm not denying science. I'm not being irrational. I'm not being in denial. My point is that it becomes catastrophizing when you emotionally react out of fear and not logic. And it happens in smaller scales too. Like, you guys get all bent out of shape because like people leave you on red, right? They're never gonna call me again. Like, okay, well, yeah, maybe they're never going to call you again. Maybe you're right. I don't know. But they probably are. Maybe they're taking a dump. Chill. I mean, who knows? You don't know. Right? Well, if they were, they would respond because y'all are gross and that's what you do. All right, so after a breakup, you catastrophize. Right? We've all been there. I've been there. I was there as a teenager. A breakup happens and the world is ending. You're hysterically crying. You cannot be consoled. You just sit in your room. Nothing but Virginia Woolf quotes on Instagram, and just like tears and dark colors, and you're like somehow pissed off that the birds are singing because why should they get to be happy, right? And your parents try to help. They're like, sweetie, go away, Mom. No one loves me. I'm going to be alone forever. And that's what you want. Slam your door. Chill. Okay? Chill. You're like, I don't do that. Yes, you do. Because we've all done that. And here's the thing, it's normal behavior, but it's not rational behavior, right? So we can't live in that space forever. That's why it's a cognitive distortion. It's okay to mourn. It's okay to emotionally react, but you can't live there, right? That's not a rational place to be. It's fine that you're dealing with your emotions, and we're going to help you. Pat you on the back and be supportive. Let's stress eat. No, we talked about that yesterday, right? Let's go say bad things about him online. No, that's toxic too, right? But here's the thing. We can be good friends and support you, but you can't live in that space forever. It's not a rational place to be. Eventually, we'll both laugh at this. Now, me faster than you, but that's a different scenario, right? So, it's an example of catastrophizing, right? It can be easy to be swept up into catastrophizing a situation once your thoughts become negative. When you predict doom and gloom, all you have to do is remind yourself that we don't know this. This is not a foregone conclusion. We don't know that this is the case. You're like, he's just cheating on me. I just know it. We don't know that. I mean, maybe he is. I guess we'll find out soon enough. I don't know. But we don't know that yet. What are you basing this on? You're basing it on your own psychological insecurities, which is, yeah, exactly. Because I saw he has 3 different profiles on Tinder, which you also are on, okay? Take some responsibility, right? Just kidding. Those are all very toxic things that you should not be doing. But it's catastrophizing. It's catastrophizing. So we had blaming, mental sin number 1. Filtering, mental sin number 2. Catastrophizing is mental sin number 3. Let's get into the 4th one. Now, I'm a little bit passionate about this one, so it's going to take a more serious note because I'm talking to myself here. In fact, when I look back at when I was in your position in life as a teenager, I could have benefited from hearing this. So some of you that won't pay attention to this and it'll go in one ear and out the other, but that's not going to stop me from trying, okay? This is a very real thing that a lot of people deal with, and it's very natural. In fact, I struggle with this even now as an adult. It's not just a teenage thing. Cognitive sin number 4 is personalization. And what it means is that sometimes we take things too personally. Sometimes we think things are an attack on us and our character, when they're really just constructive criticism, right? So I can give you examples of this, but this, again, it's like, I'm passionate about this, so I'm sorry for being so intense, but I want you guys to hear this. Stop taking things so personal, right? The thing is that you're smart people. You know if someone's attacking you personally. You know if they make it personal because you have friends and sometimes they go too far. And sometimes maybe a teacher says something that's out of bounds, right? Or maybe your coach goes too far and yelling at you. That's not what I'm talking about. You guys know when it borders into attack, abuse. But stop just assuming that because people are giving you constructive criticism that they have it out to get you. The teacher hates you because they disagreed with you in a classroom discussion. Dad, the coach doesn't like me anymore because he won't play me. I wasted a lot of time in my life as an athlete especially, but even as a student, with a bad attitude because I did exactly this. I took things too personal. I made them about me and not about my growth. I didn't assume that people were trying to help me. I thought they were out to get me. That's an immature stance, but it was the truth. I'm just admitting that to you. I'm just trying to just level with you, right? So here's the thing about personalization. It's also kind of a form of narcissism because we like to think that we don't believe that the world revolves around us, but look what we're doing. We're making everything about us. We think people are out to get us. Somebody's complaining about something and you make it about you. It's not about you, right? Check it out. Look at it this way, right? Somebody doesn't call you back. She must be mad at me. Your coworker is grumpy, and so your assumption is, well, he doesn't like me. You're taking it personal. You're making it about you. But there's better examples, right? So I thought for a while about how I wanted to type this, and I phrased it very specifically. So this is what it says. Personalization, or taking things too personally, contributes to an inability, hear this, an inability to self-improve. If we cannot take constructive criticism from those that are in a position to help us grow, whether it's teachers, coaches, mentors, or even your significant other. This is what I want you guys to understand. Listen, let people help you. Your parents have an opinion on what you do. They're emotionally passionate about what happens to you. Your teachers, your coaches, they're emotionally invested in what happens to you. Stop taking it personally when they correct you. Be coachable. Right? Because here's the thing. What you think is, someone hates me. Right? Sometimes you're too close to a situation and they're just giving you feedback. Like significant others. Think about this. If I was so prideful and emotionally fragile in my relationship that I can't take constructive criticism from my spouse, then that says a lot about me. Because we have to be in a place where she can correct something, because she might realize that I'm too close to see it, but it's a flaw that I have that I can fix. But we put these guards up and we get defensive and we push people away and we keep them at arm's length because we don't really want to get better. We don't really want to grow. We don't really want to improve. We want to live in this fantasy world where nothing is our fault, and when you tell me something is wrong about me, it's a personal attack on my character. But y'all, I want you to think about it this way. Love and hate are both passion emotions. So they can't be opposites. So love and hate come from a place of care. Now it's different care. If you hate somebody or something, it might bother you. But you care enough about it for it to affect you. Same thing is true with love. When you love somebody or something, it bothers you. You're emotionally invested in it. So if love and hate are both passion emotions, they can't be opposites. So what's the opposite of love then if it's not hate? It begins with an A.
Anger.
No. Anger is also a passion emotion. We need something that's devoid of any connection. That's a closer guess, but that's not the answer. The opposite of love is apathy. Apathy. Now, this is real stuff. Check this out. When people care enough about you to go to the trouble to argue with you, you should consider that a blessing. Because here's the problem. The alternative is they don't care about making you better and they no longer bother with you anymore. Because I want you to put the shoe on the other foot. Let's say that you're in a relationship and somebody is doing destructive things to themselves over and over and over again. And you keep trying to help them and you keep trying to tell them and you keep trying to just pour into them and they refuse to help themselves. What are you going to do? You're going to move on to somebody else. And this is a painful realization because there's going to be times in your life if you don't learn this, because it happened to me, that people try to help you and they try to correct your behavior and they try to give you critique and criticism. They try to make you better, but you refuse and they move on to somebody else. That can happen to you in a job. When people try to give you feedback and criticism and they try to pour into you and help you grow and you can't see that because you're too caught in your feelings and they move on. It can happen in relationships. It can happen from your coaches. And again, I've been teaching for 11 years. I've seen on few occasions, it's very rare, but I've seen what it looks like when parents give up on their kids. And it's not a good situation. Because to reach a place where you care so much about somebody that you continue to try to correct their behavior, try to give them feedback, try to make them better, try to help them see, and you get to the point where you just say, you know what, I'm exhausted enough. I don't care what you do anymore. That's the opposite of love. When someone gives up on you, that's the opposite of love. So while somebody still cares enough about you to correct your behavior, you need to consider that a blessing. No one ever explained it to me like that when I was 17, and I had an attitude problem because I thought people were out to get me. You need to hear this from an old guy to young people. Stop taking things so personally when people try to help you. People in your life are in a position to help you grow. They get nothing out of it but making you better. Stop resisting people's help. Yes?
So what would be the opposite of hate then?
What would be the opposite of what?
Hate.
The opposite, well, I think apathy would be a positive opposite of hate. Right? Because if I hate you, that means what you do or what you say has an effect on me, right? So if I hate you, then you do stuff, you say stuff, your face bothers me, you put things online, we walk by, right? But if I could care less what happens to you, right? So that's kind of a two-way street. That's a good question, right? If the opposite of love is apathy, then to some extent the opposite of hate also has to be apathy, right? And maybe it's good. Instead of hating you and wasting my energy, I've moved on, right? Whistling down the street, cutting toxic people out of my life. Awesome.
That's a Taylor Swift song.
Is it really? Good old T-Swizzle coming in, right? But here's the thing, right? But there's some reality to. Is it really? Is that really a Taylor Swift song? It sounds like a Taylor Swift
Shake It
song.
Off.
There you go.
Yeah, Shake It Off.
That's pretty much what Shake It Off is about. So there you go. There you go. From the #1 Taylor Swift fan in the front row, that is like the actual biographical reason for Taylor Swift's song. Think about it. That's intense. That's deep, y'all. You reach a point where you can't invest any more energy in someone, so you just give up trying. So don't take things so personally. That's the fourth one, right? Here's the fifth one. And some of you struggle from this because you're givers. And it's good to be a giver. But at the same time, you have to learn to create healthy boundaries. This one's called shoulds and oughts. This is mental sin number 5. Shoulds and oughts are basically like you do things out of this sense of responsibility, even though it may not necessarily be the healthiest thing for you. Right? So a lot of times people, they become martyrs. We call them Martyr Syndrome, and they constantly help other people, and it drains them, right? It emotionally drains them. They constantly just pour into other people, and they help, and they basically enabling people who are emotionally needy. Mm-hmm. And you probably know people. Some of you are like that because you're very agreeable. It's a good personality trait. It comes from a place of good intentions. But if you're not careful and you're always looking out because someone should help them, someone ought to do something, someone should be, you're right. It doesn't always have to be you. Shoulds and oughts are where you focus on other people's expectations of you, and that can drive you crazy. And you guys know this because you're always the one who's first to finish your notes, and so everybody knows. They just line up and they'll take your notes from you. There you go.
$5.
Yeah. Maybe you'd get something out of that. You're the first person to finish vocab. You're the first person. You're everybody's emotional support. And they come to you and they always drain you, and then they walk away fulfilled, and they just line up for you to help them again. Right? So learning to create healthy boundaries is essential for your mental health. It's essential for your peace. Don't let people sap you of your energy because you're always giving and giving and giving. Because guess what? There's a lot more takers in the world than givers. And when people find out that you're willing to give, they're going to line up to take from you. Exactly.
You're a walking carpet.
You're exactly right. You are a target, and an easy one at that. You feel you ought to do work for another classmate's benefit, to take the time to tutor them, even though it's going to make you behind in your work. You don't have the time or the mental energy, but you do it because you feel like somebody should, right? Your classmate has access to other resources. You're enabling them. What you can do, and this is hard to do for people who fall victim to shoulds and oughts, create some boundaries. Help them help themselves. Say, listen, I don't have the time to go through this with you, or I don't have the mental energy, but here are the 5 things that I use for my notes that really help me. And really what you're doing is saying, you go over here. You have to create boundaries, y'all. You have to create boundaries. Feeling responsibility for things that others can and should do for themselves. Right? Shoulds and oughts. Being willing to prioritize your own needs by saying no to things that are not your responsibility creates a healthy boundary. Somebody that I respect a lot once told me this statement, so I'll tell it to you guys. They said, every time you say yes to one thing, it means you're saying no to something else. Because you only have so many hours in the day. You only have so much mental energy. You can't do everything that people ask you to do. And I used to do that early in my career. It's like, well, they want me to coach a sport. I'm going to do it because it's going to make me look great. And here I am doing my part. And somebody should do it, and I can do a good job. So let me line up and do that. Oh, you want me to start another club? I'll start another club. You want me to stay after for this and stay after for that? And people message you at all hours of the night with their emotional crisis, and you try to help them because it's the right thing to do. But you have to create boundaries, or people will just keep taking and taking and taking and taking and taking from you. So a lot of you do this, and it comes from a place of well intentions, but that's mental sin number 5 is shoulds and oughts. Giving too much of yourself can not only lead others to take advantage of your generosity, but can also leave you burned out and frustrated, right? Shoulds and oughts, that's an interesting one. Here's mental sin number 6, jumping to conclusions. This one is self-explanatory. We assume we know what people mean, but we don't ask them for clarification. No meme on the internet encapsulates this more than this one, right? And there are lots of inappropriate versions of this meme. I've thought probably longer than I should have about putting in this slide, but I decided on a Buzz Lightyear related one instead. You know, of course, it's the famous, he's probably thinking about other girls. And in reality, he's over here thinking, if Buzz Lightyear is in denial of being a toy, why does he still freeze when humans are around, right? And that, ladies, is just a little preview into the complexities of the male mind, right? So you're overcomplicating this. Don't jump to conclusions. You don't know. Ask for clarification. Hey, are you mad at me? Yeah, ask for some clarification.
A duck is a duck.
Exactly. When we see a spade, call it what it is. It's a spade. But you don't know that, right? Don't jump to conclusions. Here's a good one. That lady hates me. That lady tried me, right? Assuming a teacher hates you because they give you negative feedback. You're jumping to a conclusion. You don't know that. Ask for clarification. Assuming someone you're attracted to does not like you because they have not returned your message. You're jumping to a conclusion. I don't want to ask them because they hate me. I know what that guy thinks about me.
Most likely they just ignore you.
That's probably it. They're dudes. They're playing Fortnite. Okay? You're going to have to hit them up again, right? It's not personal. I bet he's thinking about that girl, and he's not at all. He's thinking about Fortnite, right? So this is the last one. I saved this for last because this is one that you know all too well. Mental sin number 7, comparison. Comparison, comparison, comparison. Famous Teddy Roosevelt quote I put on the slide, comparison is the thief of joy, right? Here's the thing. This is my biggest problem with the privilege narrative. Again, it's not about being correct or incorrect. It's that all that's going to do when you compare yourself to what other people have, it's just going to make you discount what's good about your life, but also just steal your joy. Here's the thing. If you didn't know what other people had, you'd be perfectly happy and content. So it's not just about stuff and money and things. You do that academically. Like you work really hard and you study and you work your tail off and you come in here and you pull a 83 on a test and you're like psyched about it, and then the person next to you is like barely breathing and drooling on the desk and they get a 92 and you're like, come on! If they weren't here, you'd be happy with your 83. It's not a failure of your grade, it's something else that somebody else got. You got to stop doing that. Everybody's got their own journey, man. You got to stop doing that. Comparison is not a healthy way to live your life. Making unfair comparisons about ourselves and other people can ruin our motivation. Looking at someone who has achieved much success and thinking, I should have been able to do that, isn't helpful, especially if that person had some lucky breaks or competitive advantages along the way. So let them go to space, man. Who cares? You're not Elon Musk. It'd be great if you were his adopted child, but you're not. Okay, so stop comparing yourself to him because you got a great life. There's plenty of things going for you, right? Rather than measuring your life against someone else's, commit to focusing on your own path to success. And I got to end on a 12 Rules for Life quote. Don't compare yourself to who someone else is today. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, right? Everybody's on their own journey. Remember yesterday, the path to success is not linear. It's not a straight line. You get 1% better some days, and some days you fall off, and then you get back up and you keep going. It's not a straight line. There's ups and there's downs, but you keep moving forward, right? So those are the 7 mental sins. Comparison, jumping to conclusions, shoulds and oughts, personalization, catastrophizing, filtering, and blaming. Those are the 7 mental sins. So stay tuned tomorrow. We'll talk about relationships.